6 years ago, on what should have been an ordinary evening, a mother's life was shattered. Inside the quiet walls of a church, her daughter disappeared without a trace. No witnesses, no evidence, just a girl who walked into a bathroom and never came out. The search consumed the town. Whispers turned into theories, and yet, the mystery only deepened. How could a child vanish into thin air? And why, after all these years, does a single photograph threaten to unravel everything? A mother's love never fades, but what if the truth is more terrifying than she ever imagined? Tonight, we embark on a journey of secrets, betrayals, and revelations that will leave you breathless. Watch closely because nothing is what it seems. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The tension in the Parker household had been simmering for months, but tonight, it boiled over. Lauren Parker stood in the middle of the dimly lit living room, her face flushed with frustration as she stared at her husband, Daniel. His arms were crossed, his jaw clenched, his exhaustion evident. But Lauren didn't care. "You missed it, Daniel," she snapped, her voice thick with emotion. "Emma looked for you. She stood on that stage, scanning the crowd, waiting for you to walk through those doors. And you never did." Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. "Lauren, I told you work ran late. I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," she countered, her blue eyes shining with unshed tears. "You just never choose us." For a moment, silence settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Lauren could feel the weight of every argument they had pushed aside for the sake of routine, for the sake of appearances. Their marriage had become a fragile illusion, held together by a shared past and a beautiful little girl who still believed in the family they once were. A soft voice interrupted the thick tension. "Mommy!" Lauren turned sharply to see Emma standing at the bottom of the staircase, her small hands clutching the railing. She wore her favorite light blue dress, the one with tiny embroidered flowers along the hem, and her blonde curls were slightly tangled from the rush of the evening. "Can we go to church now?" Emma asked, her voice hesitant, as if she had sensed the battle brewing between her parents. Lauren inhaled deeply, forcing herself to smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Go get your coat." Emma nodded and hurried back upstairs. As soon as she was out of sight, Lauren turned back to Daniel, her voice lower but no less sharp. "I'm taking her to church. We'll talk about this later." "There's nothing to talk about," Daniel muttered, shaking his head. "You always make me the villain." Lauren didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her purse, her coat, and walked out the door with Emma, leaving behind the fractured remains of a marriage she no longer knew how to fix. The church was just a few blocks away, its tall steeple standing proudly against the night sky. St. Mary's had always been a place of comfort for Lauren, a place where she could find solace in the quiet hum of prayers and the flickering glow of candlelight. She held Emma's hand tightly as they walked through the doors, the warm scent of aged wood and faint incense wrapping around them. The evening service was peaceful, filled with familiar faces and murmured hymns. Lauren closed her eyes, exhaling slowly as she listened to the priest's voice, letting the words wash over her like a balm against the wounds of the night. And then, Emma whispered, "Mommy, I have to go to the bathroom." Lauren smiled gently, brushing a loose curl from her daughter's forehead. "Go ahead, sweetheart. I'll be right here." Emma nodded and slipped away, her small feet barely making a sound against the polished floor. Lauren watched her disappear down the hallway before turning her attention back to the service. Minutes passed, then more. A faint unease prickled at the back of Lauren's neck. She glanced toward the hallway, expecting to see Emma skipping back toward her seat. But the hallway remained empty. Her pulse quickened. She stood, smoothing her dress as she made her way toward the bathrooms, her heels clicking softly against the floor. The door to the restroom was slightly ajar. "Emma?" she called gently. Silence. Lauren stepped inside, her heart pounding against her ribs. The tiled walls reflected the dim light, the air heavy with the scent of lavender soap. But there was no sign of Emma. Her breath hitched. She checked each stall, her voice rising with each call of her daughter's name. "Emma?" "Sweetheart, are you hiding?" Nothing. Panic wrapped around her chest like a vice. She rushed out of the bathroom, her eyes scanning the church. People were still seated, their heads bowed in quiet prayer, unaware that Lauren's world was beginning to fracture. She spotted an usher near the entrance and hurried toward him. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shaking. "Have you seen my daughter?" A little girl, blonde hair, blue dress. The usher frowned. "I don't think so. When was the last time you saw her?" "She went to the bathroom and never came back." Something in her voice must have alarmed him because his expression shifted. "Let's check outside." Lauren followed him, her heart thundering. The cool night air hit her skin as they stepped out onto the steps of the church. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows across the pavement. "Emma!" Lauren's voice cracked as she called her daughter's name into the night. No answer. She ran to the sidewalk, her eyes darting in every direction. The street was quiet, too quiet, and then she saw it. A single shoe, Emma's shoe, lying near the curb. Her knees buckled. A scream built in her throat, but no sound came out. The world blurred around her, distant voices blending into a deafening hum. People rushed toward her, questions flying from every direction, but she couldn't hear them. All she could see was that small shoe. All she could feel was the cold, hollow emptiness that had replaced the warmth of her daughter's hand in hers. Emma was gone. The search that followed was relentless. The entire town came together, their faces plastered with worry as they combed through every street, every alleyway, every possible hiding place. Flyers with Emma's picture flooded the neighborhood. News reports carried her name across the city. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, but there was no trace of her. Daniel blamed Lauren. "You let her go alone," he had screamed, his face contorted with grief. "You should have gone with her." Lauren blamed herself. Every night, she replayed the moment over and over, searching for something she had missed, some detail that could have changed everything. But there was nothing. Emma had vanished, leaving behind only a single shoe and an unbearable silence. 6 years passed, and then, one evening, as Lauren walked along the shore, lost in the rhythm of the waves, she saw something that made her heart stop. A little girl, dressed in white, holding the hand of an elderly man. Her breath caught, because the girl had blonde curls that glowed under the fading sunlight. And when she turned, her bright blue eyes met Lauren's. Eyes that she had spent 6 years searching for. Lauren's breath hitched as the world around her slowed. The salty breeze that once felt refreshing now stung her skin, and the rhythmic crashing of the waves became a dull hum in the background. Her entire being focused on the little girl standing just feet away, her small hand tucked securely in the grasp of an elderly man. It wasn't possible. Couldn't be. And yet, those eyes. Lauren had spent 6 years memorizing every detail of her daughter's face from the countless photographs she kept hidden in a box beneath her bed. The curve of her cheeks, the golden curls that danced with the wind, the way her lips slightly parted when she was deep in thought. This was Emma. Lauren's body moved before her mind could catch up, her feet sinking into the cool sand as she took an unsteady step forward. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, her pulse quickening with every step. "Emma," her voice was barely a whisper, choked with disbelief and desperation. The little girl blinked, her small fingers tightening around the elderly man's hand. There was a flicker of recognition in her expression. Just a flash, like a memory buried too deep to grasp, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Lauren's throat tightened. "Emma, it's me. It's Mommy." The elderly man's posture stiffened at the sound of Lauren's voice. His grip on the little girl's hand became protective, almost possessive. He turned his gaze toward Lauren, and for the first time, she met his eyes, calm, knowing, but with something unreadable lurking beneath the surface. He smiled gently, almost as if he pitied her. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I think you're mistaken." Lauren's stomach twisted. "No," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "This is my daughter. She disappeared 6 years ago." The man's expression didn't change, but his grip on the girl remained firm. "This is Lily," he said smoothly. She is my granddaughter. We live just up the coast. Lauren shook her head violently. No, she insisted. No, you don't understand. Her name is Emma Parker. She was 8 years old when Her voice broke. When she vanished. The little girl frowned slightly, her blue eyes flicking between Lauren and the man. Lauren knelt on the sand, reaching her hand out hesitantly. Emma, sweetheart, do you remember me? Do you remember your bunny, Mr. Whiskers? You used to take him everywhere. The little girl's lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. The man sighed, his expression shifting into something softer, almost sorrowful. I'm very sorry for your loss, he said gently. But you have the wrong child. Lauren's head spun. No, this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a coincidence. This was her daughter. Let me talk to her, Lauren pleaded, looking at the man desperately. Please, just for a moment. The man hesitated, glancing down at the girl. At Lily, as he called her. Lily? He murmured, his voice coaxing. Do you know this woman? The little girl looked at Lauren again. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in her expression. Something distant, something almost lost. Then, she shook her head. No. Lauren felt the world tilt beneath her. The man exhaled. Come along, sweetheart. And just like that, he turned, guiding the girl away. Lauren lurched forward. Wait, please. But the man didn't stop. The little girl glanced back once. Just once. Before disappearing over the dunes. Lauren fell to her knees, the weight of the moment crushing her chest. Her lungs burned as she gasped for air, her mind screaming against the reality before her. How could this be happening? How could Emma not remember? And who was that man? Lauren barely registered the presence of another person approaching until she felt a hand on her shoulder. She flinched, turning sharply to find Oliver Grant standing there. His dark eyes filled with concern. Lauren, his voice was cautious. Are you okay? Lauren couldn't find her words. She could only shake her head, her hands trembling. Oliver had been a private investigator before he retired, and though she hadn't seen him in years, she had once begged him to take on Emma's case. He had tried, but after years of dead ends, he finally told her that there was nothing left to find. But now there was something. Emma, Lauren finally choked out. She's alive. She's here. Oliver frowned. What? Lauren pointed toward the dunes, her voice frantic. She was just here. I saw her. She was with some man, an older man. He called her Lily, but I know it was her. I know it. Oliver followed her gaze, but the beach was empty now. The only footprints left behind were their own. Lauren, Oliver said carefully. Are you sure? Lauren's eyes burned. I would know my daughter anywhere. Oliver studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then we need to find out who that man is. Lauren swallowed, nodding, because no matter what it took, no matter what she had to do, she was going to get her daughter back. Even if Emma didn't remember her. Even if the man insisted she was someone else. Because deep down, Lauren knew the truth. That little girl was Emma Parker. And someone had spent 6 years making sure she never remembered. Lauren sat in the dimly lit cafe, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Across from her, Oliver Grant watched her carefully, his fingers drumming lightly against the wooden table. The low murmur of conversation around them felt distant, muffled, as if the world outside had become nothing more than background noise to the storm raging inside her. Tell me everything, Oliver said finally, his voice calm, measured. Lauren exhaled shakily. I was walking along the beach, and I saw her, Emma. She was with an older man, maybe in his 70s. He was holding her hand, and she looked exactly the same, Oliver. Like she hadn't aged a day since she disappeared. Oliver's brows knitted together. That's not possible. I know what I saw, Lauren shot back, her voice laced with frustration. She had the same hair, the same blue eyes. And when I called her name, she looked at me. For a moment, I swear she recognized me. Oliver leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. And this man, what did he say? He said her name was Lily, that she was his granddaughter, Lauren said bitterly. He acted like I was crazy, like I had mistaken her for someone else. But it was her, Oliver. I know it was her. Oliver studied her for a long moment before finally nodding. All right, if you're sure, then we need to start digging. Lauren felt a flicker of relief, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of what they were about to do. She had spent the last 6 years in agony, drowning in dead ends and unanswered questions. Now she finally had someone to chase, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. We need to find out who that man is, Lauren murmured, more to herself than to Oliver. Oliver nodded. I'll do some research, see if I can track him down. Did he give you a last name? Lauren shook her head. No. He just said her name was Lily and that they lived up the coast. Oliver frowned. That's vague, but it's something. Lauren clenched her jaw. It's more than I've had in 6 years. Oliver tapped his fingers against the table in thought. I might still have some contacts who can help. Give me a couple of days. Lauren felt the familiar sting of impatience rise in her chest, but she forced herself to nod. She had waited this long. A few more days wouldn't kill her, but the thought of Emma slipping through her fingers again, that just might. The next morning, Lauren found herself standing in front of the church where Emma had disappeared. The building looked the same as it had that night, quiet, solemn, with its grand wooden doors standing tall against the backdrop of the city. She swallowed hard as she stepped inside, the scent of old wood and faint incense wrapping around her like a ghost from the past. Everything looked exactly as it had that night. The pews, the altar, the soft glow of candlelight, and yet, everything felt different. Lauren walked slowly down the aisle, her footsteps echoing against the high ceilings. She stopped near the back, where she and Emma had been sitting that night. She could still picture her daughter beside her, her little legs swinging slightly as she hummed under her breath, waiting for the service to start. Mommy, I have to go to the bathroom. Lauren's throat tightened. She had let her go alone, and she had never come back. She turned, her gaze landing on the hallway that led to the bathrooms. A chill ran down her spine as she made her way toward it, her heartbeat hammering in her chest. The bathroom door creaked as she pushed it open. The air inside was cool, the tiled walls reflecting the dim lighting. She stepped inside, running her fingers over the sink counter, memories crashing into her like waves. Emma, her voice echoed in the empty space, just as it had that night, just as it had every time she had replayed this moment in her mind. She stepped toward the last stall, the one Emma had entered. She hesitated before slowly pushing the door open. Empty. Of course, it was empty, but something felt off. Lauren frowned, stepping back, her eyes scanning the room. It was just a bathroom, just a regular church bathroom. So why did it feel like something was watching her? She exhaled shakily, running a hand through her hair. Maybe she was losing it. Maybe after all these years, the ghosts of the past were finally starting to consume her. She turned to leave, and then she saw it. A small scratch on the edge of the bathroom stall. It was faint, barely noticeable, but as she stepped closer, she realized it wasn't just a random mark. It was a word, carved into the wood. Lily. Lauren's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled back, her pulse racing. Lily, the name the old man had called Emma. Her stomach twisted as realization settled over her like a suffocating fog. Emma had been here. Emma had been here after she disappeared. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, dialing Oliver's number with shaking fingers. He answered on the second ring. Lauren, I found something, she whispered, her voice hoarse. What is it? She swallowed hard. Emma. She carved something into the bathroom stall. The name Lily. There was silence on the other end. Then Oliver's voice, sharper this time. You need to get out of there. Lauren's breath hitched. Why? Because I just found something, too, Oliver said, his voice tense. That man you saw with Emma? His name is Henry Whitmore. And 6 years ago, his wife filed a missing person report. Lauren's heart pounded. A missing person report for who? Oliver hesitated. Then, for their daughter, Eleanor Whitmore. Lauren felt the blood drain from her face. But that doesn't make sense, she whispered. Emma isn't. And then the real horror set in. Henry Whitmore's daughter had disappeared 30 years ago, and she had looked exactly like Emma. Lauren stood frozen in the dimly lit church bathroom, her heart pounding so hard it drowned out every other sound. The name Lily was carved into the wood, delicate yet desperate, like a whisper from the past trying to break through. The air around her felt colder now, heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding secrets they refused to give up. Oliver's words still rang in her ears. Henry Whitmore's daughter disappeared 30 years ago, and she looked exactly like Emma. Lauren swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the sink to steady herself. None of it made sense. How could Emma, a little girl who vanished 6 years ago, be connected to a missing person case from decades before? And why did this man, Henry Whitmore, have Emma, calling her Lily, as if she had never been Lauren's daughter at all? She forced herself to take slow, steady breaths. Focus. Panicking wouldn't bring her any closer to the truth. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Pressing the phone against her ear, she turned away from the carved name and whispered, Oliver, what exactly did you find about Henry Whitmore? There was a brief silence on the other end before Oliver's voice returned, low and serious. I ran his name through every database I could access. He's a retired professor, used to teach history at a university upstate. Lived in the same house by the coast for over 40 years. His wife, Margaret Whitmore, died 5 years ago, but before that, Lauren, she filed a missing person report for their daughter, Eleanor. She was 8 years old when she vanished. And according to the old reports, Oliver hesitated. According to what? Lauren pressed, her fingers tightening around the phone. Oliver exhaled. According to the reports, Eleanor looked exactly like Emma. Like, identical. Same hair, same blue eyes, same features. I found old pictures, Lauren. If I didn't know better, I'd say I was looking at Emma's school photos. Lauren's entire body went numb. It was impossible. There was no way. Her voice faltered, her mind spinning. That's not possible, Oliver. Emma is my daughter. I carried her for 9 months. I know, Oliver said quickly. I'm not saying she isn't. But don't you see? This means something. This isn't just some coincidence. That man, Henry Whitmore, he took Emma for a reason. And I think we both know now it wasn't random. Lauren felt the world tilt beneath her. Emma had been chosen. But why? And how did this missing girl from decades ago fit into it? Her fingers trembled as she ran them over the carved name one last time before stepping back. She needed to leave. Needed to get out of this place before the weight of it all suffocated her. Meet me at my office, Oliver said. I'll show you the files I found. Lauren barely managed a nod before ending the call and rushing out of the bathroom, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she made her way out of the church. The night air was crisp against her skin, but it did nothing to cool the feverish panic burning inside her. Emma was out there. Emma was alive. But if Lauren was right, if Henry Whitmore had taken her, then Emma wasn't just missing. She had been turned into someone else. Lauren barely remembered the drive to Oliver's office. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, but her mind was far from the road. It was stuck in the past, in the night Emma disappeared, in the years of agonizing silence that followed. And now, suddenly, everything had changed. When she arrived, Oliver was already waiting for her. A folder open on his desk, old black and white photographs spread across the surface. Lauren stepped inside and immediately felt her stomach drop. Because staring back at her, in an old newspaper clipping dated 1989, was Emma. Except it wasn't Emma. The name beneath the photo read Eleanor Whitmore. Lauren's breath came in short, shallow bursts as she reached for the picture with shaking fingers. It was uncanny. The resemblance was so perfect, so precise, that if she hadn't known better, she would have sworn this was her daughter. Her knees threatened to give out. "How is this possible?" she whispered. Oliver rubbed a hand over his face. "That's what we need to find out." Lauren flipped through the old reports, her eyes scanning the words. 8-year-old Eleanor Whitmore disappeared without a trace. No witnesses, no evidence, just gone. It was Emma's story, the same age, the same mysterious disappearance, the same face. Lauren felt the room closing in around her. Do you think Henry believes Emma is some kind of reincarnation of Eleanor? Her voice was unsteady, foreign to her own ears. Oliver exhaled slowly. I don't know, but what I do know is that men like Henry Whitmore don't just randomly take little girls and claim they're their granddaughters. He had a reason for choosing Emma. Lauren's mind reeled. Henry had called Emma Lily. Had he given her a new identity? Had he raised her to believe she had always been someone else? Had he erased her memories? She clenched her jaw, the fear and confusion inside her quickly morphing into something else. Determination. I want to talk to him, she said firmly. Oliver's brows furrowed. Lauren, I need to see him, she interrupted, her voice unwavering. If he really thinks Emma is his granddaughter, then he won't just disappear. He'll stay in town, and I'm going to find him. Oliver studied her, and for a moment she thought he might argue. But then he sighed and nodded. All right, but we do this smart. We find out where he's staying first. No confronting him alone. Lauren's hands curled into fists. I don't care what it takes, Oliver. I'm getting my daughter back. She had spent 6 years living in the darkness, in the empty void of not knowing. But now, the light was finally breaking through, revealing truths she had never imagined. And one thing was terrifyingly clear. Emma Parker was never meant to disappear. She was meant to become someone else. Lauren barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Emma, or was it Eleanor? Standing on that beach, her blue eyes locked onto hers, as if there was something buried deep inside her that was trying to claw its way out. The memories, the truth, the girl she used to be. But what if there was nothing left to find? What if Henry Whitmore had taken more than just her daughter's presence? What if he had taken everything, her past, her identity, her very sense of self? By the time the first rays of morning light filtered through her bedroom window, Lauren had already made up her mind. She wasn't going to wait. She wasn't going to let Henry slip through her fingers the way Emma had that night in the church. She was going to find him, and she was going to make him talk. Oliver met her outside his office, a disposable coffee cup in one hand, a file in the other. His dark eyes were sharp, calculating, scanning the street as if expecting Henry to step out of the shadows at any moment. I found something, he said without preamble, handing her the file. Lauren's fingers tightened around it. Where is he? Checked into a small bed and breakfast just outside town, Oliver replied. He used a fake name, John Miller, but the ID didn't match. The owner said he's been staying there for a couple of weeks. Lauren's pulse quickened. So he's been here before I saw him on the beach. Oliver nodded grimly, which means he wasn't just passing through. He was watching. Lauren's stomach twisted. The idea of Henry Whitmore being in her town for weeks, silently observing, waiting, planning. It made her skin crawl. She exhaled sharply. I want to see him. Oliver hesitated. Lauren, we don't know what kind of man he is. If he's been living with Emma all these years, if he's manipulated her into believing she's someone else. He's not just some harmless old man. Lauren met his gaze with an intensity that burned through her exhaustion. He stole my daughter. Oliver sighed. All right, but we do this carefully. I go in first. You wait outside. Lauren wanted to argue, but she knew Oliver was right. She wasn't thinking straight. The moment she saw Henry, she might lose control, might let her emotions take over, might ruin everything. So she nodded. Fine, but if I don't like what I hear, I'm going in. The bed and breakfast was nestled between 2 towering oak trees, its white shutters weathered from years of coastal wind. The air smelled of salt and damp earth, the kind of scent that clung to your skin long after you'd left. Lauren stayed in the car while Oliver walked up the steps and knocked. She watched, every muscle in her body coiled with tension, as an elderly woman opened the door, speaking with him in hushed tones. And then there he was, Henry Whitmore. He stepped into view slowly, almost cautiously, his white hair neatly combed back, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He was wearing the same pressed slacks, the same beige sweater he had been wearing on the beach. He looked like a kind old man, the kind who might feed birds at a park, who might read bedtime stories to his grandchildren. But Lauren knew better. She gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Oliver extended a hand to Henry, speaking in that calm, measured tone of his. Henry listened, then said something back, his mouth curling slightly at the corners. Polite smile, and then he looked past Oliver, straight at Lauren. A chill raced down her spine. For a split second, she saw something in his eyes, something dark, something knowing. Then he turned back to Oliver, shaking his head. Lauren didn't need to hear the conversation to know what was happening. Henry was denying everything. She was out of the car before Oliver could stop her. Lauren! But she was already halfway up the steps, her chest heaving, her vision tunneling in on the man who had stolen her child. Henry's smile didn't falter. If anything, it deepened, as if he had expected this. "Mrs. Parker," he said smoothly, his voice calm, his tone wrong. Lauren's nails dug into her palms. "Where is she?" Henry tilted his head slightly. "I'm sorry. I don't know what you mean." Lauren clenched her jaw. "Emma, where is my daughter?" Henry's smile didn't waver. "You must be mistaken. I don't have a daughter." Fury surged through her, hot and sharp. "I saw her with you." Henry let out a small chuckle, the kind that might have been charming under different circumstances. "Ah, you mean Lily." Lauren's stomach churned. "Lily doesn't know you," Henry continued, his voice gentle, too gentle. "She has always been with me. She is my granddaughter, and she is safe. I would appreciate it if you stopped scaring her." Lauren's entire body trembled. "You're lying." Henry exhaled, as if he found this whole situation mildly inconvenient. "I understand your grief. Losing a child must be unbearable. But Lily is my family. She always has been." A sound escaped Lauren's throat, something raw, something between a sob and a scream. "She had a birthmark on her shoulder," she said desperately. "A tiny crescent moon. Does she still have it?" Henry's smile finally faltered. It was only for a fraction of a second, a slight stiffening of his features, a flicker of something behind his eyes. And Lauren knew. She knew. Before she could speak again, the door behind Henry creaked open. A small figure stepped forward, her golden curls glowing in the morning light. Lauren's breath hitched. "Emma." The little girl frowned. "Who is she, Grandpa?" Lauren's knees nearly buckled. Henry placed a protective hand on the girl's shoulder, his fingers curling slightly. "No one, sweetheart. Let's go inside." The little girl hesitated. Lauren stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Sweetheart, do you remember me?" The girl, Emma, Lily Eleanor, whoever she was now, looked at her, those same piercing blue eyes searching Lauren's face. For a second, for just a heartbeat, Lauren saw something. A flicker of confusion, of hesitation, of something buried deep. But then it was gone. She shook her head. "I don't know you." Lauren felt her entire world collapse. Henry's grip on the girl's shoulder tightened just slightly. Then he smiled again. "You should leave now, Mrs. Parker." And before Lauren could say another word, before she could scream or beg or reach for her daughter, Henry closed the door and locked it. Lauren stood there, breathless, shattered, the weight of it all crashing down on her. Oliver placed a hand on her arm, grounding her, holding her back. Lauren barely heard him when he said, "We'll get her back," because all she could hear was Emma's voice, small and uncertain. "I don't know you." Lauren sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her fingers ached. Her breath came in shallow, uneven gasps, her mind caught in an endless loop of Emma's face, her voice, the way she had stared at Lauren like she was a stranger. "I don't know you." Those words felt like knives, slicing through her chest with brutal precision. She wanted to scream. She wanted to kick down Henry Whitmore's door and drag Emma out of that house. Hold her, remind her of who she was. But even as the rage burned inside her, she knew that wasn't how this would work. Henry had spent years crafting his illusion. He had built an entire world for Emma, a world where she wasn't Emma at all, where she was Lily, where she had never been Lauren's daughter. And Emma believed it. Oliver sat in the passenger seat, silent, watching her carefully. "You need to breathe," he finally said. Lauren forced a deep inhale, but it did nothing to stop the shaking in her hands. "She didn't recognize me, Oliver," she choked out. "She looked right at me and—" Her voice cracked. Oliver exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "That man has had her for 6 years. You said it yourself, he must have done something to her, conditioned her, maybe even wiped her memories. If he's been feeding her the same story since she was a child, she's not going to remember overnight." Lauren squeezed her eyes shut. "But I saw something, just for a second. It was like she almost knew me." "Then that means she's still in there," Oliver said. "Somewhere deep down, Emma is still Emma." Lauren turned to him sharply. "Then we have to bring her back." Oliver was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "We will." Lauren's mind raced. What if we test her? If Henry erased her memories, maybe there's a way to trigger them. Something from her past. Something he couldn't erase. Oliver's brow furrowed. "Like what?" Lauren's hands trembled as she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn object. Mr. Whiskers. Emma's stuffed bunny. She had kept it all these years, tucked away in a drawer, waiting, hoping. Oliver's gaze softened. "You really think that'll work?" Lauren swallowed hard. "I have to try." Oliver nodded slowly. "Then we need to get close to her again." Lauren clenched her jaw. "Which means we need a reason to be near Henry Whitmore." The next morning, Lauren found herself standing in the front yard of the bed and breakfast, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at the house. Oliver had spent the night digging through records, trying to find any connection, any weakness that could help them. And he had found one. Henry Whitmore, the well-respected retired professor, was in debt. Lauren inhaled deeply before walking up the steps and knocking on the door. It took a moment before the door creaked open, revealing Henry standing there, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. His gaze flickered with something, mild amusement perhaps, before he sighed. "Mrs. Parker," he said smoothly, "I thought I told you to leave." Lauren forced a smile. "Actually, I came here to offer you something." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" She took a steady breath. "I heard you're struggling financially. I know about the debt." Henry's expression barely shifted, but she saw it. The flicker of surprise, the brief clench of his jaw. Lauren pressed forward. "I want to help. I'm a real estate agent. I can help you sell your house for double what it's worth. Get you a fresh start." Henry tilted his head, watching her carefully. "And why?" he asked, voice measured. "Would you do something like that?" Lauren's smile didn't waver. "Because I want to make sure Lily has a good future." There it was, the hesitation, a crack in his perfectly constructed mask. He exhaled slowly, as if considering. Then he nodded, stepping aside. "Come in, Mrs. Parker." The moment Lauren stepped into the house, she felt it. The air was thick with history, with secrets. The wooden floors creaked under her weight, the scent of old books and salt lingering in the space. And then there she was. Emma sat on the couch, her small hands folded neatly in her lap, her blonde curls cascading over her shoulders. She looked so much like herself and yet different. Lauren's heart clenched painfully. Emma glanced up, her blue eyes locking onto Lauren's. There was nothing in them, no recognition, no warmth. Lauren forced herself to smile. "Hi, Lily." The little girl blinked. "Hello." Henry gestured toward the kitchen. "Tea." Lauren nodded numbly, following him, but her eyes remained fixed on her daughter. As they passed the living room table, Lauren casually reached into her purse, fingers brushing over soft, worn fabric. And then, with practiced ease, she placed the stuffed bunny on the couch beside Emma. She didn't look, didn't pause, just kept walking. Minutes passed. Lauren sat stiffly at the kitchen table, her cup of tea untouched. Henry sat across from her, his fingers interlocked, watching her with quiet curiosity. "Why are you really here, Mrs. Parker?" he asked smoothly. Lauren met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I told you, I want to help." Henry studied her, his lips curling slightly. "You know, it's funny. I spent years studying history, the past, what people choose to remember, what they choose to forget." Lauren's blood ran cold. "But the thing about the past," Henry continued, his voice almost hypnotic, "is that it can be rewritten, with time, with patience, with the right guidance." Lauren's hands trembled under the table. "You stole my daughter." Henry tilted his head. "Did I?" Lauren's jaw clenched. "Or," Henry mused, "did I simply show her a different truth?" Lauren wanted to scream, wanted to grab him, shake him, demand to know what he had done to Emma. But then a noise, soft, a whisper of a memory breaking free, tiny gasp, and then a name. "Mr. Whiskers?" Lauren's heart stopped. She turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat. Emma stood in the doorway, the stuffed bunny clutched tightly against her chest. Her little fingers dug into the fabric, her blue eyes wide. Lauren felt tears burn in her eyes. "Sweetheart." But before she could speak, Henry's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Lily." Emma flinched. Lauren saw it. The brief moment of doubt. The tiny flicker of who she used to be. Henry's jaw tightened. "Go to your room, Lily." For a moment, the girl hesitated. Then she obeyed. Lauren watched, helpless, as her daughter disappeared down the hall. Henry turned back to her, his expression no longer polite. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. Lauren's breath shook, because now she knew the truth. Emma was still in there, and Henry Whitmore knew it. Lauren's hands curled into fists beneath the kitchen table, her nails biting into her palms as she fought to steady her breathing. Across from her, Henry Whitmore remained composed, his face an unreadable mask, but his eyes had changed. He knew. He had seen the way Emma hesitated, the way she clutched the stuffed bunny, the way a single, fragile memory had slipped through the cracks of whatever lie he had built around her. And now he was angry. Lauren swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I didn't do anything, Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully, her voice controlled. "I was just being polite. I saw a child, and I gave her a gift." Henry smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. "A gift," he repeated softly. Lauren's chest ached with the effort it took to keep her composure. "Yes, a gift. It's just a stuffed animal, nothing more. But I suppose you're afraid, aren't you?" Henry didn't answer. Lauren leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "You're afraid because you saw it. The way she looked at me. The way she almost remembered." Henry's fingers tightened around his teacup, the only sign of tension in his otherwise perfectly controlled demeanor. "Lily is happy," he said smoothly. "She has everything she needs. A home, stability, a future." Lauren's blood boiled. "She has a lie." Henry exhaled sharply, as if the conversation had grown tedious. "Why can't you just accept the truth, Mrs. Parker?" He gestured toward the hallway where Emma had disappeared. "That little girl in there? She's not yours anymore." Lauren's heart clenched painfully, but she refused to look away. "She is mine, and no matter how hard you try, no matter how many years you've spent filling her head with your version of reality, you can't erase who she really is." Henry tilted his head, studying her. "You seem so sure of that." Lauren didn't blink. "Because I know my daughter." A flicker of something, annoyance, doubt, crossed Henry's face, but it was gone in an instant. He sighed, pushing back from the table and standing. "You should leave now, Mrs. Parker. This conversation is over." Lauren's pulse pounded. No, she couldn't walk away. Not yet. Not when she was so close. She stood too, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. "I'll leave." She met his gaze head-on. "But I'm not going away." Henry gave a small, tight smile. "You should." Lauren's throat went dry. It wasn't a threat. Not exactly. It was something worse, a warning. She forced herself to turn, to walk toward the door with measured, controlled steps. But as she reached for the handle, she hesitated. She had to see Emma one last time. Just before stepping outside, she turned her head slightly toward the hallway. "Goodbye, sweetheart," she called softly. A beat of silence. Then soft footsteps. Emma peeked out from the edge of the hall, her fingers still curled around the stuffed bunny. Her blue eyes filled with something Lauren couldn't quite name. Henry stiffened. Lauren's breath caught. "Take care of Mr. Whiskers for me, okay?" Emma's fingers tightened around the bunny. Then, in a voice so small, so hesitant, it nearly shattered Lauren's heart. "Okay." Henry's face darkened. Lauren turned and walked out the door, knowing, without a doubt, that she had just planted the first seed of doubt inside her daughter's mind. Back at Oliver's office, Lauren paced relentlessly, running her hands through her hair, her mind spinning in frantic circles. Oliver sat at his desk, watching her. "He's not going to let you near her again." Lauren stopped, turning to face him. "Then we have to make her come to me." Oliver frowned. "How?" Lauren exhaled shakily. "Emma might not remember me, but she felt something. I know she did. And if I can keep reminding her, keep pushing those memories back into the light, she might start questioning him." Oliver nodded slowly. "So, what's the next step?" Lauren sat down, rubbing her temples. "I need to be near her. She needs to see me over and over, until the truth becomes louder than the lie." Oliver sighed. "That means finding a way into Henry's world." Lauren clenched her jaw. "Then let's find one." The next day, Lauren stood outside Hawthorne Academy, a prestigious private school just a few miles outside of town. It was where Henry had enrolled Emma, a school filled with wealthy, well-connected families, a place where no one would question Henry Whitmore's perfect life. But Lauren had a plan. She had spent the night researching, making calls, pulling every string she had left. And now she had her way in. Adjusting her blazer, she walked through the front doors, her heart hammering. A receptionist greeted her with a polite smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" Lauren returned the smile, composed, practiced. "I'm here for my first day as a substitute teacher." The woman checked her computer, nodded. "Ah, yes, Miss Parker. Correct." Lauren's stomach flipped. "That's right." The receptionist handed her a folder. "You'll be working with the elementary students today. Room 3B. Lauren swallowed hard. She already knew who was in room 3B. Emma. The classroom was bright, filled with laughter, the scent of paper and crayons thick in the air. Lauren stood at the front, her hands steady on the desk, her heartbeat wild. And then the door opened. A line of students walked in, chatting, giggling, completely unaware that this was the moment Lauren had been waiting for. And then there she was, Emma. Her golden curls bounced as she moved, her blue eyes scanning the room absently. She walked in without hesitation, without a second thought. Lauren's breath hitched. Emma sat at a desk near the middle of the room, pulling out her notebook. Lauren forced herself to move, to step forward, to act normal. "Good morning, class," she said, her voice calm, steady, controlled. The children quieted. "My name is Miss Parker. I'll be your substitute today." And then Emma looked up. For a second, just a second, her brows furrowed. Lauren saw it. That tiny flicker of confusion, of something trying to surface. Lauren's heart pounded. Emma didn't remember her, but she recognized something, and that was enough. For now, Lauren stood at the front of the classroom, her heart hammering so violently she was sure the children could hear it. Emma had looked at her. It was just for a second, but it was there, the flicker of something buried deep beneath the surface, something waiting to be unearthed. She forced a steady breath, gripping the edges of the desk in front of her. She had to be careful. If she moved too quickly, if she pushed too hard, Henry would pull Emma out of this school, and she'd lose her again. Lauren turned to the class, her smile practiced, her voice smooth. "All right, everyone, let's get started." The students settled in, their notebooks open, their pencils scratching against the paper. But Lauren's attention was solely on Emma. The way she sat, her small hands folded neatly on her desk, her expression blank, but not quite. Something inside her was stirring. "Why don't we start with introductions?" Lauren suggested, her gaze flicking toward Emma. "Let's go around and say our names. Tell me something you love to do." The children perked up, eager to talk. One by one, they spoke. Ben loved to play soccer. Mia liked to draw. Lucas wanted to be an astronaut. Then Emma. She lifted her chin, her blue eyes meeting Lauren's again. "My name is Lily," she said softly, "and I like the ocean." Lauren's throat tightened. Emma had always loved the ocean. As a child, she had spent hours chasing the waves, collecting shells, laughing as the tides splashed at her feet. It was one of her happiest memories. And she remembered. She just didn't know she remembered. Lauren smiled, keeping her voice light. "The ocean is beautiful, isn't it?" Emma nodded slowly. "Yes, but sometimes I think I liked something else more." A hush fell over the room. Lauren's breath caught. "Oh? What do you think that might be?" Emma's small brows furrowed. She opened her mouth to speak, and then the door creaked open. Lauren's stomach dropped. Standing in the doorway, his face as calm as ever, was Henry Whitmore. The air in the room shifted. The children fell silent. Lauren forced a polite smile, even as her entire body screamed. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, keeping her voice steady. "What a surprise." Henry smiled, but his eyes were sharp. "I like to check in on my granddaughter now and then." He turned to Emma, his voice soft. "How are you, Lily?" Emma hesitated for just a moment. Then she smiled. "Good, Grandpa," she said. Lauren's hands clenched into fists. Henry's gaze flicked back to Lauren, amusement curling at the edges of his expression. "I wasn't aware you'd be teaching here, Miss Parker." Lauren matched his stare. "It was a last-minute assignment. I'm sure you understand." Henry exhaled, slow and deliberate. "Of course. I only ask that you be mindful of Lily. She has a delicate mind. Too much change isn't good for her." Lauren's nails dug into her palms. Henry wasn't just warning her. He was threatening her. She nodded, her voice smooth. "I would never do anything to upset her." Henry studied her for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod. "Enjoy your day, Miss Parker." Then he turned to Emma. "I'll see you at home, sweetheart." Emma smiled at him. "Okay, Grandpa." And just like that, he was gone. Lauren exhaled, barely realizing she had been holding her breath. She turned back to Emma, but the moment had passed. The flicker of memory, the hesitation, it was gone. But Lauren wasn't giving up. She had one more chance. That evening, Lauren sat in her car outside Henry's house, her fingers drumming anxiously against the steering wheel. The sky was a deep shade of blue, the last traces of sunlight fading into the horizon. She had followed them here. Emma was inside. She had one shot before Henry buried her daughter's memories even deeper. Lauren reached into the passenger seat, grabbing the small object she had brought with her. It was a photograph, a picture of her and Emma, taken just days before she disappeared. Emma sat in Lauren's lap, her blonde curls a mess from running along the beach, her tiny arms wrapped around her mother's neck. She had been so happy. Lauren stepped out of the car, her pulse hammering as she walked toward the house. She knew Henry had security cameras. He was watching her right now, so she wouldn't knock. She wouldn't break the rules. She simply bent down, slipped the photo under the door, and whispered, "Remember, sweetheart." Then she turned and walked away. The next morning, Lauren arrived at the school earlier than usual, her stomach twisted into knots. Would Emma even be here? Would Henry pull her out the moment he found the photo? She walked into the classroom, setting her things down, forcing herself to stay calm. The bell rang. The children filed in. And then Emma. She walked in slowly, her movements careful, deliberate. But there was something different. She wasn't carrying her backpack. She was carrying the photo. Lauren's breath caught. Emma hesitated for a second, then walked straight to Lauren's desk. She placed the photograph down in front of her. Lauren swallowed hard, looking up. "Where did you find this, sweetheart?" Emma bit her lip. "I don't know," she whispered. I just woke up, and it was in my room." Lauren's fingers trembled. Emma's eyes searched hers. Confusion, hesitation, something breaking through. "Miss Parker," she said, her voice small. "Why am I in this picture with you?" Lauren's chest ached. She wanted to tell her, wanted to scoop her up, hold her, tell her everything. But she couldn't. Not yet. So instead, she smiled gently, planting the next seed. "You look happy," she said softly. Emma's fingers brushed over the photo. She nodded. "Yeah," she whispered. "I do." Lauren knew she had just changed everything. Lauren barely moved, barely breathed. Emma had the photo. She had brought it to her. She was questioning it. The seed had been planted, and now, for the first time in 6 years, Emma was doubting the reality Henry had built around her. But doubt wasn't enough. Lauren needed more. She forced herself to smile as she gently took the photograph, holding it carefully between her fingers. "It's a beautiful picture, isn't it?" she said, her voice soft, steady. Emma's blue eyes flickered with something. Hesitation, uncertainty. "Yeah," she whispered. "But why don't I remember it?" Lauren's heart ached. She had to be careful. If she said too much, too soon, Emma might retreat, might shut down. If she said the wrong thing, Henry would pull her from school, and she'd lose her forever. So she exhaled, keeping her tone light. "Memories are funny like that," she said. "Sometimes they get buried deep inside us. And sometimes, all it takes is one little thing to bring them back." Emma stared at the picture for a long time. Lauren watched as her tiny fingers traced the image. Then a flicker. A single, fragile flicker of something deep inside her. Emma's lips parted slightly. But before she could finish, the classroom door swung open. Lauren's stomach dropped. Henry Whitmore stepped inside. The air shifted. Emma flinched. And just like that, the flicker was gone. Lauren clenched her fists beneath the desk, her nails digging into her palms so hard it burned. She forced herself to breathe, to stay calm, even as her entire body screamed at her to run, to grab Emma, to get her out of here. Henry smiled. "Good morning, Miss Parker." Lauren returned the smile, her voice smooth. "Mr. Whitmore." His sharp gaze landed on the photograph. Lauren knew the exact moment he saw it. The tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw ticked. It was quick, controlled, but she saw it. Henry turned to Emma, his voice gentle. Too gentle. "Sweetheart, come here." Emma hesitated, and for the first time she looked at Lauren first. Lauren's breath caught. Henry's smile never faltered, but there was something dark beneath it. "Now, Lily." Emma stood slowly. Lauren watched, helpless, as she walked to him, watched as Henry placed a hand on her shoulder. Possessive grip. Henry turned back to Lauren, his expression polite, his voice calm. "I'm afraid Lily won't be staying for the rest of the day." Lauren's stomach twisted. She should finish her lessons. Henry's smile didn't reach his eyes. "She has everything she needs at home." Emma looked up at him, her little brows furrowed, but she didn't argue. Lauren had to do something. If she let him take her now, Henry would erase every piece of progress she had made. She could see it in his face. He knew Emma was slipping, and Henry Whitmore would not allow that to happen. Lauren took a slow breath. "Actually, before you go," she turned to Emma, her voice light, casual. "Sweetheart, would you mind helping me with something first?" Emma blinked. "Helping?" Lauren smiled, gentle, warm. "I have a book in my bag. I was thinking of reading it to the class later, but I wanted to make sure the students would like it. Would you help me decide?" Emma hesitated. Lauren saw it, the tiny battle in her eyes. Henry's grip on her tightened. But then Emma nodded. "Okay," she said. Lauren turned, reaching into her bag, her fingers brushing past papers, past notebooks, until she found it. A small, worn book. She placed it on the desk. Henry's entire body stiffened, because he knew what it was. The book was old, the cover slightly faded, but the title was still clear. The Little Sailor and the Golden Sea, Emma's favorite bedtime story. Lauren watched as Emma's tiny fingers touched the cover, and then her breath hitched, a sharp inhale, like something deep inside her had just been set on fire. Henry's grip on her shoulder turned rigid. That's enough. Lauren's pulse pounded. Emma stared at the book, silent. Then her small voice, so hesitant, so fragile. I know this book, she whispered. Henry's jaw clenched. Lauren's throat burned. Do you, sweetheart? She asked gently. Emma nodded slowly. Yes, I. Her little hands tightened around the edges of the book. I used to read this. Henry pulled her back so fast that Emma stumbled. Lauren stood immediately. Wait! But Henry's voice was cold steel. We're leaving. Emma looked up at him, her expression confused. But Henry's fingers curled around her wrist, firm but not violent. He knelt beside her, his voice quiet, dangerously calm. What did I tell you about strange things, Lily? Emma's little body froze. Lauren's chest tightened. Henry's voice remained soft, gentle, loving. Strange things make the world unsafe, don't they? Emma's lips pressed together. Henry smiled. And we don't like unsafe things. Emma's fingers slipped away from the book. Lauren's heart broke, because Henry Whitmore had just erased it. Whatever tiny, fragile piece of Emma had just surfaced was now gone. Henry stood, his voice as smooth as ever. Goodbye, Miss Parker. Then he walked out of the classroom, taking Emma with him. Lauren couldn't breathe. She had been so close, so close. That night, Lauren sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel, her entire body shaking. Oliver's voice was firm. We have to do something. Lauren stared at him, her breath uneven. I know. But what? Oliver leaned forward, his eyes dark, determined. We stop playing by the rules. We stop waiting. Lauren exhaled sharply, shaking her head. He has her brainwashed, Oliver. He spent years teaching her to fear anything that doesn't fit into his story. How do we break that? Oliver was silent for a moment. Then his voice, quiet but unwavering. We show her the truth. Lauren frowned. How? Oliver reached into his jacket, pulling out a small, unmarked USB drive. Lauren's pulse spiked. What is that? Oliver met her gaze. It's footage, he said. From the church. From the night she disappeared. Lauren stilled. Oliver placed the USB on the dashboard. We show this to Emma. Lauren's heart pounded. She reached for the drive, turning it over in her palm, her fingers shaking. She could barely whisper the words. If she sees this, Oliver nodded. Then she'll know. Lauren stared at the drive, her breath uneven, her hands trembling. This was it, their last chance. If this didn't work, she would lose Emma forever. Lauren sat in the driver's seat, gripping the small USB drive so tightly that her knuckles turned white. This was it, the last chance, the last move. If this didn't break through whatever Henry had done to Emma, she would lose her forever. The footage Oliver had recovered wasn't just evidence, it was truth. The one thing Henry couldn't erase. The one thing he had spent years hiding. Lauren swallowed hard, turning to Oliver. We have to be careful. If Henry finds out, Oliver's jaw tightened. Then we don't give him the chance. Lauren nodded, forcing a deep breath into her lungs. We have to get to Emma alone. Oliver exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. It won't be easy, but I have an idea. Lauren listened, her pulse pounding, as Oliver laid out the plan. The next afternoon, Lauren stood in the school parking lot, waiting. Her stomach was in knots. Oliver was inside speaking with the principal, a distraction. Enough to keep Henry occupied for at least 5 minutes. Lauren only needed 2. She spotted Emma stepping out of the school building, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her golden curls bouncing as she walked. And for the first time, she was alone. Lauren moved fast. She reached Emma just as she neared Henry's car, stepping into her path gently, carefully. Emma stopped short, blinking up at her. Miss Parker. Lauren's breath hitched. She forced a smile, her voice soft. Hi, sweetheart. I was hoping to talk to you for a moment. Emma glanced around, suddenly hesitant. I have to go home. Lauren knelt in front of her, her hands shaking. I know, baby, but before you go, I have something to show you. Emma frowned. What is it? Lauren slowly reached into her coat pocket, pulling out her phone. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She tapped the screen, pulling up the video. Emma, she whispered, I want you to watch this, just for a second. And if you don't remember anything, if you don't feel anything, then I'll never bother you again. I promise. Emma hesitated. Then she nodded. Lauren pressed play. The grainy security footage flickered to life. The timestamp read 6 years ago. And then Emma appeared. She was 8 years old. Her blue dress, the little white bow in her hair. Exactly how she had looked that night. The camera angle was clear. It showed Emma walking into the church bathroom. Lauren stole a glance at the real Emma, the one standing before her now. Her tiny hands had curled into fists. The footage played on. It showed Lauren standing outside the bathroom, waiting, looking around, calling Emma's name. Then panic. She rushed inside, frantically searching. Then nothing. Emma had vanished. There was no footage of her leaving, just gone. Lauren swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. You disappeared that night, Emma. This is real. It happened. Emma's breathing hitched. Lauren turned to her gently, keeping her voice steady. Does this feel right to you, sweetheart? Do you feel like Lily? Or do you feel like something's missing? Emma's little face was pale now, her blue eyes wide. And then, a single tear slipped down her cheek. Lauren's chest cracked open. Emma's tiny lips trembled. She hesitated, clutching her backpack. I don't know. Lauren exhaled shakily. It's okay, baby. Just take your time. Emma looked back down at the phone. The footage played again. And then her little fingers reached for the screen, brushing against her own image. A gasp. Emma staggered back slightly, her breathing coming in short, sharp bursts. Lauren's heart stopped. Emma, the little girl shook her head, her hands clutching her temples. I see it. I see. She whimpered, her eyes filling with panic. Lauren reached for her. Sweetheart, what do you see? Emma's tiny body shook. The bathroom. I remember. Lauren's throat went dry. Emma blinked up at her. And then she said it. The words Lauren had been waiting 6 years to hear. Mommy. Lauren collapsed. Her entire body shattered. She grabbed Emma, pulling her into her arms, holding her so tight she thought she might never let go. Emma sobbed. Mommy, I remember everything. Lauren felt her heart crack into a million pieces. I've got you, baby, she choked. I've got you. Emma was sobbing uncontrollably now. He lied to me. Lauren squeezed her eyes shut, rocking her back and forth. I know, sweetheart. I know. And then a voice, cold, sharp, deadly. Let her go. Lauren's blood ran cold. She turned. Henry Whitmore was standing there. His face was unreadable. His hands were calm. But his eyes were filled with rage. She's mine, he said, his voice even. She belongs with me. Lauren rose to her feet, shielding Emma. She's my daughter, Lauren snapped. And she remembers now. It's over, Henry. Henry's lips curled. No, it's not. Lauren's pulse pounded. Henry took a single step forward. You don't understand, do you? His voice was eerily smooth. This isn't about you. It never was. This is about her. Emma whimpered behind Lauren. Henry's voice dropped. She's special. Lauren's chest tightened. She's a little girl. That's all. Henry smiled. Is she? Lauren's stomach twisted. Henry shook his head. You were never meant to find out. But now that you have, he tilted his head. What are you going to do? Lauren didn't hesitate. She reached into her bag, pulling out the USB drive. Henry's face darkened. Lauren's voice was ice. I have proof. Video proof. You took her. You stole her. You lied to her. And if you don't back away right now, I will take this straight to the police. For the first time, Henry's expression cracked. Lauren pressed forward. You spent 6 years controlling her. But guess what? She's not afraid of you anymore. Emma peeked out from behind Lauren, her tiny face fierce. You're not my grandpa, she whispered. Henry flinched. Emma lifted her chin. I don't belong to you. Lauren's breath hitched. And Henry? Henry Whitmore stepped back. For the first time, he lost. Lauren pulled Emma close, her fingers trembling. Henry's voice was quiet. You don't understand what you've done. Lauren's voice was steel. Yes, I do. Then she took Emma's hand, and they walked away, for good. 1 month later, Emma sat beside Lauren on the porch, curled up in her lap, her little fingers playing with the edge of her old stuffed bunny. She looked up, her blue eyes soft. Mommy, Lauren smiled. Yes, baby? Emma hesitated. Then, am I safe now? Lauren's throat tightened. She kissed the top of Emma's head. Yes, sweetheart, she whispered. You're finally home.